US officials have confirmed that Ukraine has begun using long-range missiles secretly shipped in recent weeks. They say the missiles were used for the first time in a strike on a Russian airfield in Crimea last week. The Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS for short, were part of a $300 million assistance package approved by the United States in March. The US supplied mid-range versions of the system last September. This latest batch can strike targets up to 300 kilometers away. Mike Martin is a senior fellow in war studies at King's College London. He joins me now for more. Mike, welcome. What targets do these long-range ATACMS missiles now bring within the range of the Ukrainian military?
So the ATACMS system has a range of about 300 kilometers. And with that, the Ukrainians can strike all of Ukrainian territory that the Russians are currently occupying, including Crimea. And they can also reach deep into Belarus and into Russia as well.
Speaking of territory, including Crimea, you mentioned there, Ukraine has already tried to destroy several times the Kch Bridge, which connects the Russian mainland with the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula and is also an important supply route for Russian troops. Do you expect the Ukrainians to try and target this bridge again with the ATACMS?
I certainly expect the Ukrainians to target the Kch Bridge again. Whether they'll do so with ATACMS or not is open for debate. The Russians know that the Ukrainians are very interested in going for the Kch Bridge. The Ukrainians themselves a couple of months ago said that it's just a matter of time before they destroy that bridge. But if I were the Ukrainians, I would probably be looking at 3 or 4 different attack vectors at the same time. So maybe an ATACMS, maybe a Storm Shadow, a cruise missile, and maybe something from the sea, one of these drones, these sea drones that Ukraine has been using quite successfully. But there is no doubt that they will, this summer, be going after the Kch Bridge again.
How important is the destruction of the Kch Bridge for the Ukrainians?
I think there's 2 ways of looking at this. So the bridge connects Crimea to Russia proper, and it was built after the 2014, that incursion by Russia, that takeover of Crimea by Russia. And so it's a huge logistical pipeline for Russian forces in Crimea and also in the south of occupied Ukraine. So from a logistical point of view, it's a big hit for Ukraine. But actually, it has huge symbolic value. So the Kch Bridge is personally connected to Vladimir Putin. He opened it. He rode the first train car. He was the driver of the first train that went across the bridge. And so striking the bridge, collapsing it, is a huge symbolic blow to Russia as well. And psychology and symbolism have a big part to play in war.
I mean, is that really such an important thing at the moment, given how expensive these missiles are, and then there is a limited supply of them? And you also had the Kremlin saying earlier today that these missiles would not impact the outcome of the conflict.
Well, look, I think on your second point there, we can discount most things that the Kremlin says about the conflict in Ukraine. But even if we just put to one side that symbolism point, to knock out one of the 2 major logistical supply routes to Russian forces in Crimea and in the south of Ukraine, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. And that means that the Russians have to put all of their logistics through the other rail link in the south of Ukraine, coming through the Donbass and coming across that land corridor between Kherson in the west and the Donbass in the east. That makes it much easier for the Ukrainians to then attack that logistical corridor. So no matter what the price of these missiles is, dropping that bridge is of huge benefit to the Ukrainians militarily.
Talk to me about the overall Ukrainian game plan here. I mean, Ukraine has been on the back foot when it comes to the land war for a few months now. Has that game plan changed? What is it?
Well, what has changed is this 60 billion supply pipeline, and also a number of European nations have also stepped up their supplies. So the UK has just offered another £500 million worth of supplies. And so rather than being on the strategic defensive, the Ukrainians can now certainly shift to stabilize their front lines. And then I would be using some of these longer range systems like ATACMS, like the Storm Shadow that the UK has just donated a couple of days ago. And I would be using them to particularly hit Crimea. You've mentioned the Kch Bridge. There's lots of naval assets and air assets in Crimea. And all of these make it much more difficult for the Russians to progress on their front line. So paradoxically, the best way of stabilizing the front lines is to hit these things behind the front lines in Crimea, and that stops the Russians being able to support their troops on their own front line. So I think stage one is for the Ukrainians to stabilize the front line, and then they can look at places where they can do damage on the Russians with this new weapons package.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Mike Martin from King's College London, thanks so much for joining us today.